People often remember the 1950s fondly as a time when people supposedly shared a set of values and enjoyed peaceful, stable lives in the suburbs. But they think of the 1960s as a wild and crazy time filled with protest and people tossing aside traditional values. But this sharp distinction between the 50s and the 60s is not necessarily accurate. Turns out that in the 1950s, as Alfred Kinsey discovered, people were not living as wholesome lives as maybe they appeared. Also, the civil rights movement, which we tend to associate with the wild and crazy 1960s, actually started in the mid-1950s, as many African Americans were getting fed up with the fact that America was prosperous, people were achieving the so-called American dream, and yet they were still shut out. And there were people in the 1950s who didn't want to live this so-called American dream. We start seeing rebellions in various forms, people listening to rock and roll, going and watching James Dean movies, or beatniks in New York City experimenting with different forms of art and sexual behavior and drugs, living sort of like hippies before there were supposedly hippies. So maybe the 1950s are not quite as peaceful and stable as it seems on the surface. And all the craziness of the 1960s, if you were paying close attention, you would have seen it coming.